Welcome to part 6 of our robot video. So in this video, I would like to take a look at some of the animations that we can set up for our cute little robot here in Maya. All right, so one of the things that is obvious that I should probably, mention is there's a couple different ways animations can be set up, especially for a character like this, right? So the way he was built is we have 4 different pieces. We have the weapons, the base, the head, and the wheel. And if we wanted to set up a really simple animations, maybe like a loop, it would be just as easy to simply animate the actual pieces and use those for whatever reason. So if we wanted to create a simple loop and then even add some kind of a, stretchy, cartoony effect, we could use deformers and make them, a little bit stretchy. Maybe as he drives down the road, he kind of bops up and down. So that's a possibility, and you can do all of that without using joins or setting up a rig. But because this is a game character, I feel it would be better definitely to set up a some kind of a skeleton that in the game engine, would be used with a lot more control. And for scripting and coding, it's definitely a better option. But maybe just for fun, we can take a quick look at both, right? So for example, if you are creating something really simple and maybe you're just creating a short animation here in Maya and you have no reason to get too crazy, one of the things we could do is maybe first decide how many frames per second you want your animation to be. So in my case, it's currently set to 24. If you're doing this for a game engine, a lot of times the requirement would be 60 frames per second. So you just have to figure out what it is you're doing and what it is being used for. So if it's for a short or a film, 30 frames per second is a good number. 24 is set by default, and usually it works. It's not maybe the smoothest, but it definitely works well for, for like YouTube short or whatever, the reason might be. So let's just do this. Let's just create a simple 24 frame cycle of him maybe just riding or driving. And to do that, so first thing we need to do, if we don't want to use joints of any kind, you do need to set your pivots to make sure that things are rotating at the proper pivot, right? So for example, if I set the click on the wheel and isolate it, then go to my move tool, I can see exactly where my pivot is set. If I press space bar, and maybe for this animation part, we actually don't want all our lights on, and we can turn off, let's see, we can turn this button on, which is default material, and turn on the wireframe unshaded and other ports. So you can set different views in different ports. So you can see here I'm actually using the Arnold lighting with the environment light that was set up in our last video. But in this one, because I'm just using it for alignment, I don't really need the pretty view. So to be more efficient, let's go ahead and do the same thing in these other 2 ports. So again, I'm going to turn off my lights. I'm going to activate my default material. And let's see, what else can I do? For some reason, my X-ray is on. I can turn that off. I can turn on my wireframe unshaded. I can press A or F. And the reason it's not framing in is because I actually have all the cameras present here as well. So if we turn off the cameras, I believe if we press F now, yeah, it will frame it in. So a lot of times when you're trying to press F and it's not framing well, that's because you have other elements in the scene that Maya is trying to take into your shot, right? So let's go ahead and do the same thing here. I'm going to turn off the lights, activate my default material. I can turn off X-ray for now, just so it's... And you could also press Shift A or Shift F. Shift F to frame in all the pieces at once, right? So sometimes you have to select them. So anyways, let's keep going. So for our very first step, what you want to do is click on the transform tool, the move tool, and just make sure that your pivot is centered. If not, you can always come to Poly Modeling tab and click on this button here, Center Pivot, and that will make sure that the pivot for the wheel is dead in the center. All right, so the next, let's take a look at our next piece. Our next piece is the head. For this guy, I want the pivot to be right on his neck where this point is. So I'm going to go in my side view here, press the D key, and when I press the D key, I can see that my soft selection is on. So I can also press B at the same time to turn it off. And while holding the D key down, I can actually move this into position right where the neck is. So you can also actually hold down the D key and at the same time press V and then snap it to the center. So D and then V and then snap it right in the center. But when you do snap it in the center, you can see that it's actually snapping it to a vertex point, right, to this point, which is on the side, right? It's not in the center. So another trick is if you go into transparent mode, you can see that the grid line is right here. And we want this pivot to be in the center, right? So I can hold down D, and this time I can hold on the X key, and the X will snap it to the grid. So V to the point, and then X to the grid. So remember that. All right, so now I have my pivot correctly set on my character's head, which means if I grab my rotation tool and try to pivot it, you can see that it's pivoting perfect where I want it to be, right? We didn't double check the wheel. We can certainly do that too. If I grab this green arrow, I can see that, yes, it's pivoting correctly. Okay, so the next step would be to check the other pieces. Let's check the base. Where's the pivot for the base? So the base is interesting. I don't think I'm going to be animating it in any specific way. For example, I don't really need to rotate it. Ultimately, I would love to, if this was my cartoon, I would like to make the base move up and down a little bit. But in this case, we can just fake it with the shoulders. We don't really need to touch the base. So honestly, I'm not sure I'm going to be applying any animations to the base in this first simple walk cycle. All right, so I'm going to just almost leave it alone. If you wanted to, you could center your pivot just in case. Make sure that it's nice and organized. And finally, click on the weapons. Go to the move tool. And let's think about this for a second. So I would like my pivot to be probably right between these two pieces in the center somewhere. So if I hold down the D key, I can just manually position it right about here. I think that kind of makes sense, right? So then if I wanted to animate them maybe moving up and down a little bit, I could do that from the center. All right, so now since all the pivots have been set, the next step is to actually create keyframes on our timeline. So I'm going to set my timeline to 24. You can do the same. And again, 24 frames, so we have 24 keyframes to play with at 24 frames per second. So essentially this is 1 second, right? All right, so let's go ahead and go into, press spacebar while hovering over this view. Will take me into my perspective view. And one other thing that I want to point out real quick is that I have this button turned on, and I'm not sure if it's turned on by default or not, but auto key toggle, I suggest you guys turn it on as well. This means that anytime you make any movement whatsoever in your character, it will automatically set that keyframe for you automatically. So you don't have to like press S to set the keyframe. All right, so as a first step, let's go ahead and animate our wheel. So I'm going to go to keyframe 1, and before I press S, once I select my wheel, I can see that I have some rotation values and translate values in my channel box, right? So I also have some history as well. Remember, we can delete the history. And by the way, I'm not sure if I mentioned this in my previous videos, but if you want to drag any one of your buttons, so for example, the edit, delete by type history button, if you want to drag it onto your shelf, like I have in my poly modeling tab here, this is called a shelf. What you do is you go to edit, delete by type, and then you hover over the button that you want, and then you just hold down Control Shift and you left click. So if I hold on Control Shift and left click, watch my shelf, you can see that yet another history button has been added. So that's how you can collect your own custom buttons and build your own shelf. I don't need 2 of them, so I'm gonna just leave this one. So essentially, if you select one and now press on this button here, it's same as going to edit, delete history, right? So I can delete my history, and to reset my values for my channel box rotation and translate values, make sure you click on this button, which is important, freeze transformation. So once you click on it, you can see that all the values are now set to 0. And honestly, before you create any animation, it's really important that your rotation and translate values are 0, because then during the animation, you know that 0 is your default state, right? So you can always come back to the same position. So as I click on each one of these pieces, I can see that some have reset values and some do not. So make sure that every single one of them is set to 0, right? All of your elements. So that's super important. And before you do any animation, I strongly suggest you clear history on each piece as well. So you can do them individually like I'm doing, just so you have more control, or you can do them all at once by saying delete all by type history. So sometimes that's a little bit dangerous, because if you have a scene with many things in it, it will literally delete everything in your scene. So make sure you're mindful about using delete all versus delete by type. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so now I'm gonna go click on my wheel. I see that I have no history, and my channel box values are set to 0. So I'm gonna press S on keyframe 1. Then I can come to frame 24 and press S again, grab my rotation tool, and if I wanted to, I can start moving this forward, right? And you can see on the right, my rotate X value is changing, right? So essentially, I want to rotate this 90 degrees. And once I do, if I press play, you can see now I have some kind of a rotation. If I go between frame 1 and frame 24, I can see there's a jump, and that is because there's a misalignment between the tires, right? So maybe instead of 90 You could try 180 and see if that gets rid of, yeah, that gets rid of that little jump that I have. So now it's double the speed, right? And I'm okay with that. There is ease in and ease out, right? So it's not spinning continuously or constantly. You could see that it's spinning fast and then it's slowing down a little bit. To fix that, you have to go to Windows, Animation, Graph Editor, and you can see right now the animation line is kind of easing in and then easing out by default. If we select this line, we can click on this button here, which is a linear tangent, and then watch what happens to our graph. Now our animation is constant, right? There's no easing of any kind. So now if I press play, you can see the wheel is always spinning at the same speed, which is what I want in my case, because this is just a simple loop for our guy, right? So the other thing that we can quickly do is maybe let's grab his head. I'm going to press S on keyframe 1, 24, and then go to 12, press S again, and maybe move it down just a little bit. So now, as he's writing, his head is moving up and down. Another thing I can do is I can grab his weapons and do the same thing. Go to frame 1, 24, press S, and then go to 12, press S, and maybe this time the whole, all the shoulders and the weapons kind of go up just a little bit. Let's see how that looks. So now it's starting to really feel like he's in motion, right? If we wanted to also add a little bit motion to the entire thing, right? Keep in mind we don't have this grouped, so we currently don't have a way to select all the elements at once as one unit and try to animate that. So for like position or any kind of movement. So one thing we could do is we can select all of these, and normally you probably want to do this before you add animations to the pieces, but it will work after as well, because this is such a simple character. If we press Ctrl G, it will create a group, and I can call my group robot if I wanted to. And now if I select on my group, you can see that all the elements are being selected, right? And this will allow me to add animation to the group specifically. So now if I go to keyframe 1, I can press S, just like we did before, go to 12, and this time maybe I want to move this up just a little bit. So now you can see you have this more realistic motion even with the base piece of him writing, which is really, really cool. All right. So that's how fun and simple it is to create animations in Maya. In our next video, I would like to take a look at setting up joins to sort of achieve the same effect, but doing it with rigging instead. And you might be asking, like, could you take this out into a game engine? And the answer is absolutely. You can just click on your group and just go to File, Export Selection, and as long as you, for example, for Unity, and I believe it's the same for Unreal game engine as well, if you set it to FBX and make sure that your animations are clicked on Export as well as your bake, you want to make sure your bake is clicked as well. This will bring the FBX file with the animations into the game engine, and it should work exactly the same way as it is here at 24 frames per second. And as I was mentioning before, you can also at any point change your animation. frame rate, and Maya will automatically adjust it. So I'm going to save my scene, and let's go ahead and do that. So if I switch this to from 24 to, let's say, 60, you can see how Maya automatically moved my keyframes to the 60 keyframes per second, right? And another thing you can notice is that it moved my first keyframe, and if you wanted to go back to 1, just press 1 and press enter, and you can see that your first keyframe is right there. Now when you do adjust frame rate like that, a lot of times the keyframe will get positioned between the even number, so between, I mean a full number, so between 2 and 3. It looks like it's at 2.5. So to fix that, you have to right click and go to snap. And once you do that, you can see that it snaps into place. I can now hold on the shift key. I can move this around. I can put this back to 1 if I wanted to. I want to make sure that my keyframe 1 and keyframe 60 are at the same position. Now if I press play, the animation is much smoother. I'm not sure if you can see that on your end, but the way the wheel is spinning and the way the motion is, he's a little bit slower, and honestly this feels a little bit better, like he's not rushing. So that's how you adjust the keyframes at any point. Alright, so I hope you're having as much fun as I am doing this series, and I will see you next video. We'll play around with some joints. Alright, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.